I first encountered the writings of Jean-Louis Le Brie de Kerouac, more popularly known as Jack Kerouac, when I was a freshman at the Roman Catholic Illinois Benedictine College in the fall of 1986. I had gotten a part-time job processing books in the campus library, and after my shift I'd go down to the basement and pull volumes out of the old stacks to read. The building was partially underground, and those basement windows looked out at ground level towards the old main, Ben Hall. As the sun set, I sat at a formica desk, shoved against the panes, and read, for the first time, Carl Sandburg, T.S. Eliot, Thomas Merton, Thomas Wolfe, and Jack Kerouac. I was deeply troubled and felt completely out of place. Early in the year, I had been awarded a full scholarship to the theater school at DePaul University, known as a feeder school for Chicago's Goodman Theater. I wanted to be an actress. As a struggling teenager dealing with years of abuse at home, acting had been a release and joy for me for 4 years, since I took my place as a chorus member in Around the World in 80 Days as a freshman at St. Benedict High School in Chicago's North Center neighborhood. But my mom forbade me against taking the scholarship. She reasoned that if I became an actress, I would be ill-situated to marry and have a family and to properly care for children. It's a long story, but I did what my mom told me. And so at the end of my high school career, I was lost and wandering. I had ended up at this suburban school and had no idea what I was going to do with my life. In the late 1980s, Lisle, Illinois, where my college was like another planet for someone who, like me, who was from the north side of Chicago, growing up in the hub of Chicago's new wave scene. Then there had been no overlapping of alternative music and culture with the mainstream like there is now. Most of my high school classmates listened to Debbie Gibson, and while I listened to mostly English new wave music like Susie and the Banshees, Bauhaus, and ABC, I hated the suburbs. They were the mark of everything my friends and I hated. I wanted to go home. I wanted to be on Clark Street, at the Pumpkin Donuts at Belmont and Clark with the Misfits, hoping and dreaming, looking different in combat boots and black eyeshadow. This was not where I wanted to be. Despite my desire to be elsewhere and despite my hatred for the norm, the suburban, the mainstream, there was something about me that I hid, even from my best friends at Clark in Belmont, Chicago, late at night. I loved the church, and I loved my family. I was what they call a dyed-in-the-wool Catholic, as was Jack Kerouac. My baptism was planned before I was born, and the markers of my life so far had been the ensuing sacraments, my first communion, and my confirmation at 13. I had struggled belief, sure, like everyone, but unlike everyone, I had never faltered in my belief in the church or my devotion to Jesus. And I loved my mom. There was never any question about that. Kerouac was like that, too. The son of French-Canadian immigrants, the child his family called Memory Babe for his sharp powers of recollection, was raised Roman Catholic and spoke no English before he started school at the age of 6. As a teenager, he won a football scholarship that took him to Columbia University in New York. But after dropping out because of an injury, he joined the Merchant Marines in 1942, and in 1943 tried enlisting in the Navy Reserves, but after only a week, received a psychological discharge. It is still unknown what illness Kerouac suffered from, or if in fact he was ill at all, except for his own alcoholism and drug addiction. After being dumped from the Merchant Marines, Kerouac then set out to see America. He traversed the country several times over the course of 7 years, often hitchhiking, and then famously chronicled his experiences during a drug-fueled 3-week bender in April of 1951, typing them out on a 120-foot scroll of paper he taped together. It took him another 6 years to get On the Road published. When, in 1957, it finally was, it became an immediate sensation. That success set into motion a downward spiral for Kerouac, who watched helplessly and in increasing isolation and illness as his epic spiritual journey birthed a movement he had christened but wanted no part of. For while a world was seeing Kerouac as a great green light for drinking, drugging, sex, and every kind of rebellion against the norm, Kerouac, inside a painfully chiaroscuro mind, was trying to become a saint. It's still little known that Jack Kerouac loved the Catholic saints. Perhaps unsurprisingly, he especially loved saints that were less rigid about devotion to the tenets of the faith. For all his love of the church and Jesus, he was avowedly anti-church Corinthian, and more about realizing that they could never measure up and would have to do something else to get into God's graces. Kerouac cultivated special devotions to St. Francis of Assisi, a saint devoted to charity, gentleness, and kindness, and to St. Therese of Lisieux. The latter was a young French girl who realized early on that she could never make sainthood the way other saints had. She was just too goofy, too flighty, too lacking in everything considered good. Now one of the greatest saints in the church, she has known for the little way she pioneered, in which she focused each minute of her life on the little thing she could do in this moment for others, an example that has become a way of life in millions. Kerouac's shared love of faith and family wasn't why I was first drawn to him. Like most people, I was first drawn to the rebellion, the excitement, the adventure of On the Road and his other novel. I remember sitting in the basement of the library, turning pages bathed by the setting sun, pages showing Kerouac and his beat buddies smoking and drinking among mattresses on the floors of New York apartments. I remember being fascinated by the cropped pants and mohair sweaters of the girl these beats found in their orbits. I wanted to be there. I wanted to be that. But like Kerouac, I had nothing to offer but my own confusion. That confusion would stay with Kerouac his whole life, and he wasn't shy about talking about it, writing about it, about those ever-changing moods that are the downfall of every good-intentioned disciple. With Kerouac, he immortalized this confusion with his signature, groundbreaking, confessional writing style. Every thought he had, he put onto paper, and he left them there, naked, for everyone to look at. Here I am, he said, different at any given moment. I'm trying to find my way, but I'm having a very hard time. It's how I felt, too. And I imagine that's one reason Kerouac appealed and appeals to so many. We are ever changing, ever confused, ever failing. Kerouac wasn't afraid to show that, even to a universe of editors whose jobs focused on covering up the writer's process. It's no secret now that Kerouac was horrified by the beat generation that spawned from his genius. The communism, liberalism, and hedonism that so many still attach to his name were as far from Kerouac's true soul, true intent, than the heaven he wanted from the earth he was bound to. The legend is still told that Kerouac died reading a copy of the National Review. Burned into my mind's eye, the mind's eyes of many, is the interview Kerouac did with the National Review founder and editor William F. Buckley, Jr., a year before Kerouac's death, wherein Buckley, in his perfect transatlantic accent, respectfully questions a completely drunk Kerouac about what beat meant. Sympathetic, Kerouac replies, "Being a Catholic, I believe in order, tenderness, piety." The beat movement was a relatively pure movement then, asked Buckley. Yes, it was pure. In my heart, answers Kerouac. Certainly, what was in Kerouac's heart was much of the time far different from what emerged at the surface. His sexual exploit, he partnered with men almost as often as with women, and often with a lot, are infamous, as are his addictions to alcohol, drugs, and general debauchery. It was these exploits that led to Kerouac usually being excluded from lists of Catholic authors. But to continue to exclude Kerouac from such lists would be a great mistake. It was rather these very failings, or rather his recognition of and shame about, that puts him right at the top of the list. Looking even deeper than retribution, even in these exploits, Kerouac wasn't looking for sexual pleasure or the release of drugs for kicks, no matter what anyone may have seen. He was looking for what Catholics call the beatific vision, the real namesake of the Beat Generation. That beatific vision is nothing less than union with God, with the angels and joy. And Kerouac sought to find it with others, with himself, with the church, indeed, in every moment that was fleeting too fast, every moment he was chasing. As he himself said in On the Road, a pain stabbed my heart as it did every time I saw a girl I loved who was going the opposite direction. Kerouac wanted to be in the moment. He wanted to experience humanity, love, loss, pain, tenderness, anger, joy, everything. For him, there was intense meaning in every moment, every meeting, and every leaving. God was in those moments. And Kerouac made it clear that On the Road was a story about two Catholic men traveling the country in search of God. And so you could say that in this age where mindfulness has become the mantra and religion of countless millions the world over, Kerouac was maybe the founder of this modern church too, although he would have hated that as he hated the Beat Generation. He probably would have told the mindfulness crowd to open a Bible, as he himself always did before beginning to write, and no matter how drunk he was. For all Kerouac's feeling that the entire world had, to quote T.S. Eliot, had the experience but missed the meaning of what his work meant, he continued to defend the church and the Jesus he had met as an altar boy back in Lowell. When beatniks and hippies trashed either of them, he scolded that Jesus had, quote, died for bums like you. I remember one night when I was sitting in my cinder-block dorm room in 1987, looking out over the suburban campus. I had brought my turntable to school from home, and on it was an LP of James Bond movie themes. The theme from Moonraker was playing. Shirley Bassey was singing. Where are you? Why do you hide? Where is that moonlight trail that leads to your side? Just like the Moonraker knows his dream will come true someday, I know that you are only a kiss away. I had the Dharma bombs in my hands, and it seemed to me a fitting soundtrack for my reading selection. For Kerouac, the beatific vision might be just a kiss away. It might be found in the next meeting, the next moment, the next leaving. To use a very bad metaphor, Kerouac was kissing a lot of frogs to find the meaning of everything, and the ragged, dogged desperation of his journey, and the damage done by all those frogs, showed so deeply in his troubled face in the years before his death. Jean-Louis Le Bris de Kerouac may not have been a saint, let alone the Catholic mystic he so wanted to be seen as. But there can be no doubt that today, because of him, 100 years after his birth, millions have sought the moment and the meeting and the leaving and the long road that leads to God.